Okay, John, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Shashanka, and thanks, Anna. That was great to hear how you guys are using it at the company. So as many of you may know, I'm kind of a recent community member. I joined about a month ago. Previously, I was working at LinkedIn on a federated GraphQL layer. And more recently, I have joined Shashanka in his venture. So as part of sort of booting up with DataHub, I set myself a goal to try to do some work on the front end. Specifically, I was looking to extend the front end to add something like dashboards or charts that have been added in the back end. And quickly, that initial goal sort of morphed into a different goal, which was to see how quickly I could spin up sort of a parallel stack on the front end, specifically choosing React and GraphQL. And what I want to share with you guys today is sort of what I built, why I built it, how I did it, and sort of what I'm hoping to get out of it and what I'm hoping I can contribute back to the community from this. So yeah, with that, I think we can head to the next slide, Shashanka. So the first thing, there's kind of two parts to what I've been working on. The first thing is actually adding a GraphQL endpoint into the existing DataHub frontend server, which is a play server. The reason I chose to add it there was that, first of all, it was just the clearest pathway. We already had the server. We can just add a new endpoint there that supported the GraphQL spec. I didn't have to spin anything else up. But also, I figured that the existing Ember app may benefit from being able to talk to a GraphQL server in the future. So I decided to place it there. And the second thing, you can see that basically what I've done is just add a little module to DataHub frontend. And the second part is introducing a new React client that talks to this GraphQL endpoint to create the views on the front end. So what we essentially have here is sort of a parallel UI stack, you can think of it as, that luckily is backwards compatible with everything that we currently have running for Ember. And so next I'm going to talk about why I chose to introduce these two things. Maybe before I do that, I can finish with one point that what I'm hoping to get out of this is to actually be able to incubate both of these pieces with the help of the community over time and iterate on them with the community collaboratively. So first, I'll talk about why I thought it was a good idea to sort of add a new application. Specifically, I had come to the project without much experience with Ember. And I think I personally faced the steep learning curve of Ember trying to get up to speed on the existing DataHub client. And so I think that technology-wise, it would make sense to add a React app, mainly because it can extend the reach and accessibility of the DataHub front end. As you guys probably know, like React is quite a bit more popular and much more familiar. So I found it much easier to kind of get up the learning curve of React than I the existing Ember app, and I found it quite difficult to extend for a number of reasons. The main one is that I think there was just a lack of kind of guidance around how to extend it. In addition to sort of there being some of this legacy or unused code that was appearing in that front end, but may not be present in the UI. And then finally, I found the Ember add-on structure, the architecture, to be kind of difficult to work with and confusing in terms of my mental model. And so I think that in building a new app, technology aside, we will have a really good chance to sort of be more deliberate about these aspects. So specifically making sure that those levers for customization and extension by individual organizations are built into the front end from the beginning. We can have a chance to clean up some of that dead code that may not be used today. And then finally, we can make sure that we have very clear and documented paths to doing things like extending the front end. I think with that, we can go on to the next slide. And so as I was building the initial React demo, I initially was hoping to use the Play APIs, but I found that it was a little bit difficult because there was no clear contract. So, in order to understand what those endpoints from the Play server were returning, they were just JSON blobs, I'd have to kind of probe those endpoints directly. Some of them had sort of these view models that are specific to the client, like dataset view, and some of them were just GMS models that were passed through, so like the corp user PDL. So I found that it really helped my own personal iteration speed by sort of taking the time at the beginning to establish that explicit contract. And I think GraphQL is great for this because it provides these self-documenting, strongly typed and validated contracts. It provides like a dependency, which is this intermediate API layer that the client can depend on, which makes it also very easy to sort of switch the implementing server technology in a way that's opaque to the end client. The next thing is, I think GraphQL in itself kind of reduces the API calls as well as the noise by virtue of being able to sort of ask for exactly what you want, as well as being able to traverse related entities with fewer API calls. So there's just a reduction in this back and forth. The next thing is that it kind of minimizes the surface area that we have to expose and maintain. And so what this really means is just one less step to extending the front end, which is you don't have to add another endpoint. And then finally, I thought that GraphQL actually really models kind of what we're working with in this graphical topology of the metadata graph much more accurately than sort of these verticalized segmented endpoints. And so that's kind of why I thought GraphQL would be a good choice here. And I found that it definitely helped in just building out my demo in terms of my iteration speed. So if you guys want to see kind of how I did it, I have a few RFCs open, one on GraphQL queries, one on mutations, still some discussions ongoing, which I'll discuss in a bit. And then I have a new proposal to sort of incubate this parallel React app, as well as a proof of concept for all of those things as well. And I think with that, I'm going to just quickly jump into a demo of the React stuff I've been working on. Now okay, I might want to screen share, let's see. Okay, yeah, so right now, like this is very mocked. Like we are working against GraphQL, but we're using this mock GraphQL server that instead of the DataHub front end to actually populate the data. But I'll just show a few screens just as a proof of concept. So here you can see I directed us right to a search because this is something I've already implemented. But you can see it's pretty similar to the existing search. I've only implemented datasets so far, but we can go take a look at what a dataset page looks like. So again, fairly similar to the existing one. Can add people, whatever. Only implemented ownership so far, so there's still quite a bit of work to do. But I think what I was hoping to do with this is kind of prove out the idea that this can be done. And not only that, but that it can be something that we can iterate on quite quickly. So with that, I'll just go back to the slides.
That's very cool. I thought the React app would look much better, John. Why does it look as boring as the regular LinkedIn DataHub?
I think we have to hire a developer into the community. I mean, sorry, a designer rather.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'll just quickly talk about some of the open discussions we have on these topics. So the first thing is sort of how we should model GraphQL queries. Our proposal is that we essentially take the public GMS models, not the entity and aspect models, but the models that are exposed at the GMS get and batch get API layer, which is like dataset.pdl, for instance, and use those to actually auto-generate this GraphQL schema, such that we don't have to sort of maintain multiple type systems or schemas across different layers of the stack. Right now, we kind of have this divergence. In some cases, there are different view models on the front end. And what that means is that it's just more difficult to extend. There's more steps to make changes. However, I recognize that there may be cases where we need kind of those front end specific fields. And I think we can do both with some sort of extension system, which we can talk more about in offline. The second thing is modeling mutations. There's kind of two schools of thought floating around right now. One is sort of keeping both the mutations and the queries actually sort of entity oriented to the front end, which means we don't explicitly model this concept of entity and aspect, specifically like the differentiation between the two on the front end. And the front end simply treats all of these models as entities, just single documents, which it can do updates against, as opposed to having to have different routes or different mutations for each aspect, say ownership, schema, et cetera, that you need to change. You can just have one top level data set that you can update with all of that information. I think the downside to the aspect oriented is that you just have this more coupling throughout the entire stack, where aspects as a concept sort of bleed across everywhere, right, into DataHub front end and then eventually into the client. So this is still very much an open discussion ongoing. And I'm interested to hear what the community members think for certain. And then the next thing is sort of the React Ember drift problem. And I think we're very aware that this can happen. I think our straw man is that in the long term, the React app should be kind of the default disposition of the community. And what that means is, in the short term, there's definitely going to be that functional difference as React kind of gets up to speed to match, to achieve parity with the Ember app. But once that happens, we'll have to kind of talk about how we strategize around migration. I think in our proposal, we'd sort of recommend a migration of clients from the Ember app to the React app at that point, and then eventually deprecate support for the Ember client in the long term. And with that, I'm going to talk about one other open discussion we have going right now, specifically a collaboration with Expedia, who is also interested in GraphQL, albeit in a different light. So I'm going to hand it off to Arun, who's going to talk about their experience with GraphQL and DataHub.
Thanks, John. Yeah, it was really good. Yeah, so I'm Arun Vasudevan. I'm an engineer in Expedia Group. So as we were similar to what Vyasat was talking about, our internal approach is also we have the backend DataHub, and our UI is completely internal that we hosted up. And so we are using the DataHub backends to pull information right now directly from the data stores. So I'll jump into some of the motivations behind this GraphQL approach internally, and what we are doing along with John. So internally, we have a React and Node.js front-end application which directly talks to the data stores, the MySQL, Neo4j, in order to read some of these data. But we are now looking to also mutate the data, write data. And at this point, we were looking at some good approaches to do that, and RESTly was not something that working out for us. So GraphQL suited out better because mainly around the consumption patterns, around various endpoints that could come up in the future, and also the React and Node.js app works very hand in hand with the GraphQL API. And also we wanted to make this a standalone GraphQL application deployed, so that it could scale up to any of the future needs that we might have around any other applications or any other users wanting to pull up or push data. So that's the main motivation. And where it fits in the architecture is mainly from the front end, there would be a separate GraphQL service. As of now, we're thinking it like a Spring Boot service that would call the common resolvers. The common resolvers are basically, this is where me and John would work together on coming up with, because John is calling up from his Play server, these common resolvers. So we didn't want to duplicate these resolvers. So we would try to come up with something common for both of us. And these would call the GMS DAOs directly through RESTly. The rest of the architecture would be familiar for you guys because that's similar to what DataHub is. These green components are the only ones that's added. Yeah, moving on. These are some of the details on how I'm planning to implement it. So that's the metadata GraphQL API in itself would be a standalone deployed. that would call the common resolvers to get all the resolvers fields. And from there would be the RESTly call to the GMS DAOs and specific to the GMS clients, say the data sets or ownerships or any of the other things, the ML model that gets added. So all of this would be called from the common resolvers. So by this way, we would be using the same code across for both the front end and the GMS APIs. Yeah, that's all from me. And
thanks, Arun. Yeah, I'll just go ahead and summarize that discussion. So although the specifics are still in flux, I think what we're thinking is that because Arun's use case requires sort of a standalone application that will not be communicated to from a front end as in like React or Ember, but instead a Node server, we'll essentially have a common library that we can both work against, which has essentially a shared graph derived from the GMS models, as well as a shared set of resolvers that can be pulled into both of those deployables. And this is just the overall picture here, where you have the Expedia Node server and the Ember and the React app in the picture as well here. Yep, so that's pretty much it. Thanks, Arun, appreciate it.
Thank you.
So just a quick wrap up. I think next steps for these proposals are to align with the community on some of the open discussions around the GraphQL architecture, as well as some of the remaining open details on the React side. And then hopefully iterate collaboratively with the community on both of these pieces over time and sort of push those in a manner that is sort of more agile as opposed to having sort of these large big bang RFCs and PRs that are going to take quite a bit of time to get in. So I think we should realize that, you know, this is considered in beta and everyone should be free to sort of push these things forward together. So with that, I'll conclude and hand it back to Shashanka.
All right, thanks, John and Arun. Looking forward to the collaboration here.